Is life just endless suffering with no meaning whatsoever? If God exists, why is there pain and injustice? What is the meaning of innocent people, children, dying? Why do we even bother existing in a world where evil has always been a constant? Is there a meaning to all of this? I don't know. Listen, I'm not qualified in the slightest to answer these existential questions, but I did read Jane Eyre like 38 times at least, and that's equivalent to a PhD in human nature, if you ask me. Charlotte Bronté's Jane Eyre is my favorite book of all time. I'll never forget all of the emotions I felt when I read this 19th century novel for the first time. Empathy, pain, deep respect for Jane's character, happiness, sadness, relief, more sadness. Is there a point to this little girl's suffering? I envy people who haven't read this book yet, because I too would like to experience this book for the first time again. Of course, that hasn't stopped me from rereading it and listening to the audiobook over and over. Also watching the beautiful movies, the 1943 version with Orson Welles and the more recent one with Michael Fassbender. Subjectively, I know exactly what draws me to this wonderful masterpiece. I'll try to objectively put into words some of the things it taught me about having a sense of urgency. How to have one, how to direct it. Should you always act upon it? Or should you tame that feeling sometimes? That's what I'll talk about today. Number 1. Suffering is inevitable, so don't rush it. You know how it can take some time for you to start liking a book? Some books you immediately cannot put down. Jane Eyre is not one of those books. I had to patiently wait almost halfway through the novel to see this girl have some good news in her life, and it doesn't last long. Jane soon takes another blow before you can say the worst is gone. Yet, somehow, I got super invested in this girl's hardship. I didn't have to force myself to keep reading it, even though all I was reading was hopelessness. If you don't know the story, Jane is an orphan who gets raised by her uncle's family, the brother to Jane's mother. Her uncle, Mr. Reed, seems like a loving guy who wishes to take her in and get her the best possible life along with his children.
What is your name?
Jane Eyre, sir.
But he also dies. In fact, you don't even get to read about him while he's alive. He dies, and his wife promises to take care of Jane in his deathbed, but the reader soon finds out that she's not a very good person.
By an unfortunate union which we in the family prefer to forget.
In fact, she resents the little girl, and she is quite mean to her. Jane definitely doesn't get the same treatment as her 3 cousins. And after an incident with her insolent cousin, Jane justifiably attacks the boy, which makes Mrs. Reed really mad, and she sends Jane to a boarding school for orphan girls when Jane is only 10. It's obviously not a good school. The girls are underfed, they are not warm enough in winter, they even go through a typhus outbreak. It's a disease, it's an infectious disease, and a bunch of the girls die. A lot more happens in the book, but Jane's childhood struggles take about 1/3 of the novel, and it's truly devastating. The fact that Jane is an innocent orphan who gets virtually no love, as a new mom, it's kind of hard to conceive, you know? Even though it's fiction, it's not so far from reality that you can say no child goes through this or even worse. Especially back in the day. There is evil in the world. There are people who are evil to children. No doubt about it. And you know for certain that boarding schools like the one Jane was sent to, Mr. Brocklehurst Lowood School, you know, back in the day, they were not fiction at all. Ask an Indigenous Canadian. Which makes me think, what could be the purpose of these chapters of the book? To give a background to the protagonist's life? Sure. But what's worse than anybody suffering? It's children suffering. It's beyond sad. It makes you question, why is this book so famous? Why am I even reading this? What is the purpose of all this? What has a child done to deserve all this? And I realize now that that is the very nature of pain. It comes when it comes to whomever it comes to. There may be a reason. It may just be chance. Whatever it is, the reason is not accessible to us. Don't tell me that when you're going through a tough time, you don't ask yourself, why me? We all don't like to suffer, obviously. And much like in the first chunk of Jane Eyre, when you're going through a tough time, you don't see an end to it. But that's not accurate at all, is it? Nothing is permanent, not even bad things. Suffering is not devoid of valuable lessons and meaning, which were what kept me locked in this incredible story. The intriguing way that Helen Burns, one of Jane's little friends in Lowood School, teaches her about compassion, faith, humility, virtue. Despite being rejected by her own father when her mother passed away, this innocent girl, Helen Burns, it's touching. This is a book written by a Christian, and I am a Christian and appreciate these values. But even if you're not, I don't see how compassion and humility aren't fundamentally good for anyone. Fast forward to later in the book, you can clearly see how formative her time with Helen were to Jane, as she becomes this fierce, dignified, virtuous woman.
No sight so sad as that of a wicked child. Do you know where the wicked go after death?
They go to hell,
And what is hell?
a pit full of fire.
And what must you do to avoid it?
I must keep in good health and not die.
Hard times are not devoid of joy and love either. Jane wasn't rejected by everyone. She was loved by Bessie, her aunt's maid, her loving companions at Lowood, Helen Burns, and Miss Temple, a tutor that later became friend. She still finds joy in the springtime when the weather warms up and the privations in the school are lessened. The urgency we feel to rush through hard times in life and in literature may prevent us from learning things that will be useful when life gets easier. It will prevent us from soaking up the bad so that we recognize the good when we see it. It will even prevent us from finding little joys here and there because things are not altogether bad. And if you're paying enough attention to anything other than your own misfortunes, you may see beauty in the world. Number 2, adventure calls and it's frightening. On the topic of suffering, one argument is that the antidote for suffering is comfort. But there's an even better antidote, and it's the adventure to excellence. Keep that in mind. Like I said, I have many reasons to love this book. One of them being the fact that I first read it 5 years ago when I was preparing to leave my home country and packing to go to a strange place with no guarantees, no acquaintances, and pretty much nothing. And then comes this quote in chapter 11. It is a very strange sensation to inexperienced youth to feel itself quite alone in the world, cut adrift from every connection, uncertain whether the port to which it is bound can be reached, and prevented by many impediments from returning to that it has quitted. The charm of adventure sweetens that sensation. The glow of pride warms it, but then the throb of fear disturbs it. Oh, this quote. It means so much to me. Again, when I first read it, it was exactly what I was feeling, getting ready to leave everything behind. I love that there's a cadence to it. It starts positive and optimistic and goes down and down. You know, the charm of adventure, the glow of pride, and then the throb of fear. It's not a positive sentence at all. See, when you're off to do something so abrupt, like leaving abroad, the further you are from the departure date, the happier and more excited you are. The bigger the urgency you feel, you know. You want it so much. You've prepared for so long. You can't wait to go. Yet, when it's time to actually go, all of a sudden, you're afraid, sad, already missing your old life, already missing your friends, and you didn't even step into the plane yet. Paradoxically, the closer you get to your departure, the worse you feel. Even when you really want to leave. Miss Charlotte Brontë was very successful in translating the sensation in this quote. Perhaps because she herself lived abroad. You know, some people even think that Jane Eyre is kind of autobiographical. Brontë lived abroad in Brussels for a while and went to a boarding school like Jane Eyre. I assume she knew the feeling very well. Anyway, if you feel the same urgency, perhaps not to leave your country, but to do something else, you know, change careers, tell somebody you love them, get married. If you have something living in your mind rent-free, but you didn't have the guts to start yet, I have news for you. First, it's gonna bug you forever if you don't do it. And second, when you finally find the courage to do it, it's gonna be scary as fuck. So beware. I have a whole newfound respect for anyone who left their comfort zone. For me personally, I don't have a zero to hero story yet, but I'm definitely wiser, braver, and much happier than I was 5 years ago. Even though I don't feel like, you know, everything makes sense and it's so hard to be thousands of kilometers away from your family and friends in your comfort zone. But, you know, everything makes sense because there's a reason for everything. You know, that's not the place where I'm at right now. I like the choice that I made. I like it and I have hopes. But it's not clear to me that, you know, it was for the best. However, you know, the sign that I have that it may have been for the best is that the alternative, you know, staying comfortable where I was 5 years ago, sounds more frightening. Make sense? And that serves to me as confirmation that I did the right thing. I treated comfort for an adventure to excellence. I'm not quite there yet, but I have a feeling I'll be one day. If your comfort zone is secretly boring the hell out of you, if you secretly feel like running away from it all every Sunday evening, if you think your job is boring and is robbing years off of your life, or maybe your personal life is the problem. Maybe you are unhappy when you come home from work. Maybe you feel lonely. Maybe you need one more cat. Anyhow, if you're feeling, yes, comfortable, but something is bugging you in the back of your mind, you're craving change, you're craving adventure, then maybe you have a calling. If that's the case, if adventure is calling you, but you've been snoozing its calls, sending it to voicemail because you're too scared, don't. Be scared and jump anyway. I promise. It will be the hardest thing you'll ever do. But then you will survive and you will be able to potentially conquer even scarier things. 3. Seek virtue, not comfort. Finally, our internal urgency is not always met with the perfect conditions. T. Finally, our internal urgency is not always met with perfect conditions externally. Just because you want it so bad doesn't mean it's meant for you. How do we know when to tame our sense of urgency instead of acting upon it? Well, sometimes it's pretty obvious. Like take Jane Eyre, for example. Spoiler alert. Do we need one for a 1847 book? Anyways, she falls in love with a married man. Of course, she fell for him before knowing he was married, and it's arguably a complicated marriage, but nonetheless, it's a marriage. It takes her all the strength she had, but she is able to remove herself from the situation. And although it seems even more difficult than everything else she went through in life, she ends up in a way better position because she did the right thing. It takes time, but the universe or God rewards her for having such a strong character.
Take a candle with you, leave the door open. Sit down at the piano and play a tune.
Opening a tangent here, I have so much respect for the demonstration of self-regard and dignity that Jane Eyre, running the fuck away from Rochester, shows. She could have taken the easy path. She could have taken the easy way out and be his side chick. It wouldn't be surprising considering her upbringing, if she chose to downplay her own values to bargain for love, the very thing she has been deprived of her whole life. But she didn't do it. She didn't do it for her aunt. She didn't do it for Mr. Rochester. It's a hell of a lesson about self-control. Closing the tangent. And again, perhaps your situation is not so black and white, and you still don't know if you should go for it or not. But I'm here to argue that most things are way simpler than we want to believe they are. You just have to strip the matter of the extra layers that you put on top of it. Oh, but Bertha is crazy. Oh, but he says he loves me. Oh, but my therapist says that I deserve it. Oh, but it's not even a real friendship. Shut up with the excuses. See things for what they are. If you're unsure, don't be afraid to dig deeper and find out. Sometimes we're scared of the truth, especially if the truth will point to our own faults. If that's the case, it's better to face your bad judgment now than later. And that way you can avoid an even bigger mistake down the line. See, sometimes we may be tempted to do the wrong thing when nobody's looking, but we forget that there's always someone looking. If you're religious like Jane, it's God. But you can also argue that you are watching yourself. And even though you're not the ultimate judge, you could lose respect for yourself. And that's no way to live. So seek virtue, not comfort, even if you have to tame your urgency in another direction. this is my takeaway from Jane Eyre. This book is awesome. Just consider reading it if you haven't already. You know, in a quick research about the topic of a sense of urgency, for the sake of making this video, I found a lot of videos about how to have urgency because life is short and you need to be productive. That's all fine, and I generally agree. But is urgency always welcome? I wonder. Comment below what you think. Do you generally agree with what I said? What did you think of Jane Eyre? Let's talk. I really, genuinely would like to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hitting that like button. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for being awesome. See you on the next one. Bye. Vou meter usando, meu amor.